Welcome back to another episode of the Jacob Johnston Show. Okay, so on this show, and if you don't have time to watch it all, subscribe to the audio version of the podcast and then listen to it on the go. All right, so I'm going to go through this show with a lot of things I'm going to try and cover. I'm going to start with the bad news, get to the good news, and then what the media reaction to it all has been. But first, 2020 has really been a crazy year. It's been the year where truly anything can happen. And things that would have been major breaking news that would have had everybody's attention, have them glued for more and more coverage, barely makes the headlines. I mean, it's so crazy that people were freaking out about a monolith found out in somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, Nevada, saying do not touch it because it reminded them of a monolith in a Space Odyssey movie or science fiction movie. And they're just saying, don't touch it, it's 2020. Wait until 2021. Well, there have been a lot of other things that have come out, and it's getting next to no attention, such as this.
So the Debrief, very interesting news organization on science, tech, and aerospace, spoke with a lot of U.S. military and intelligence officials about the UAPTF. Now, I want everybody to take that in. The Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. Now, this task force, we've talked a lot about that here. That's what is working with Congress and the Intelligence Committee. Well, it turns out, according to the Debrief, they spoke with a bunch of officials about a new report that's been circulating around the Pentagon and within the intelligence community. Now I'm going to read some direct quotes to everyone. Everyone the Debrief spoke with said that the most striking feature of a recent report was the inclusion of a new, extremely clear photograph of an unidentifiable triangular aircraft. Now yesterday, the Debrief published these photos. So the first one, let's go back to that first one, and you can see clearly it was taken with a cell phone camera from an aircraft. This was an FA-18 fighter pilot, and it was captured somewhere over the ocean. I also want to explain here the behavior. So two officials that received that report said, quote, the photo was taken after the triangular craft emerged from the ocean and began to ascend straight upwards at a 90-degree angle.
What? I mean, throughout this year, if you haven't been paying attention, and I don't fault you for not paying attention, throughout this year, there has been classified releases of our government actually studying UFOs. Think about that. Now they call it unidentified aerial phenomenons. And apparently this is serious enough that there is a group inside of the Pentagon that is studying this. And Congress has been getting classified briefings on UFOs. And now we're getting, the information out to the public. The release of the Pentagon video showing these unidentified aerial phenomenons flying around in a way that no known aircraft could possibly maneuver. And did that receive much attention? No. We have a photo right here, of what it seems to be pretty clear, and I'm hoping that since this is coming out of the Pentagon and that this is, part of classified briefings or what was previously classified briefings, that they're not photoshopped. And think about that. That is going unnoticed. That's how crazy 2020 has been. I mean, we seem to actually be getting proof of intelligent life from other planets visiting us. All of those stories about alien abductions and flying saucers may actually be real and not just the imaginings of tinfoil hat wearing the crazy people. And we're all sitting here just like, what's going on in the election? Really? And then we got another thing that is coming out. Something that we didn't think would happen. But, this is 2020. So here we go.
We have some breaking news right now. The Democratic-controlled House has approved a bill to decriminalize and tax marijuana at the federal level. And if you've been following this week, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy had criticized Democrats for bringing this up during a time when they're trying to get a coronavirus relief bill done. And almost assuredly, and of course we can't predict the future, but it looks like it will be dead on arrival when it reaches the U.S. Senate.
Okay. The federal government now wants to legalize marijuana. Now, of course, they probably figure it's a great way to raise revenue. Let everyone get stoned and tax them for it. Now, I get why the Democrats are pushing for the legalization of marijuana, given all the extent of the election, fraud that they had to engage in order to pull out a victory. It was proven that nobody in their right mind would vote for Democrats. At least not enough people. And they're trying to fix that. Okay. So, yes, I kind of botched that joke. I know I'm not going to reshoot this, or anything. So I'm just going to leave that in. I realize that my comedy needs a little working on. Okay. So we're going to start off here with the bad news. And the bad news is, I'm not sure we're getting very far in trying to challenge this election, despite all of the evidence. Right? Despite all of the evidence, we're not going to be able to do a whole lot. It seems like, every day it's getting closer and closer to the inevitability that the Democrats have gotten away with stealing this election. And there was an interesting piece here that I read from the red state. Nevada judge rules against election contest brought on behalf of Trump electors. And despite the title, I still went ahead and I read it just to figure out what is going on. And it makes a very interesting point here that one of the reasons why, despite the evidence of election fraud, that things aren't going well in the courts. Now, granted, most of these are not being brought by Trump himself or his campaign, but by other individuals, and a lot of them have been tossed out by the judge ruling there's a lack of standing. Now, the media, they have their narrative. They want to conflate all of these lawsuits as being brought on by Trump so that they can say, oh, he's lost 30-some lawsuits. See, they got nothing. When in fact, the Trump campaign has brought less than 5 lawsuits. All the other 30-some lawsuits were brought on by other people not connected to the Trump campaign. But this piece really made a good point here that, due to the extent of election fraud, the courts are not actually set up to be able to handle this because we're trying to bring a civil lawsuit to what should be a criminal investigation. And we're trying to do it within just a few weeks rather than trying to do it properly in a normal case where it would take about a year or two to get through such an investigation. But this paragraph really stood out. The judge's opinion is a good example of the problem that confronts plaintiffs in an election challenge such as the one the Trump campaign and surrogates have been waging over the validity of mail-in ballots. All the evidence rests in the hands of the opposition. The time frame allowed for an election contest in state statutes never considered the circumstance where hundreds of thousands of ballots were submitted by mail. The process for validating those ballots rested with local officials, often partisan local offices, and witnesses who might offer pertinent and admissible firsthand testimony are almost all employed by the opposing party in the case. And so we go through and we take a look at this, and I am also wondering if maybe part of the problem is the remedy that is being asked. Because, we changed the election, right? Well, the Democrats did. They violated the Constitution, threw out all the election laws, and changed how we voted, right? And because of that, it caused a lot of fraud to come into play. Of course, that was the Democrats' plan. And so now the courts are looking at this like, well, what to do? Okay, yes, these ballots are illegal and illegitimate, that came in after Election Day. But these people were told that was how the election was going to happen. And so if we toss out those ballots, then we're disenfranchising voters. Even though their votes were illegal under the state laws, they were complying by the rules that the election officials told them that they could go by. And that we'd be punishing voters for the illegal action of election officials. So what do? But on the other hand, allowing those ballots, goes through and disenfranchises those who followed the rules and now having their votes being thrown out or being drowned out or disenfranchised by those who thought the rules did not apply to them. So you got all of that issue. But then you also have the problem here whereby, the smoking gun, the judges want that smoking gun evidence to justify tossing out all of these votes and overturning the results of the election. And as this piece, had pointed out, is that those evidence, the smoking gun evidence, is in the hands of the opposition. You think they're going to hand that over, willy-nilly, just be nice and go, okay, you got us. Here's the evidence. No. But what would normally happen in a case, such as this, is you would go to discovery. And then during discovery, you would conduct the investigation. Well, we're not being allowed to get to discovery because, the ballots are supposed to be secret, confidential, that type of thing. And so going through and doing, getting a hold of these ballots in order to investigate them. Okay, let's take a look at the signature matches and all of that. So there's a whole lot of problems that are coming about here, and how to get access, because all of the evidence, and there is a massive amount of evidence of election fraud, but the evidence that we have is based off of information that is made publicly available. But we can't get access to the actual evidence, the solid evidence to go through and go, here's your smoking gun. And so we're coming across this particular problem. It's like the catch-22. We must have the smoking gun before they'll allow us access to the smoking gun evidence. And the courts are not set up to be able to handle this situation. They're just not. And so we also have, this issue where I think Giuliani, now I'm not a legal expert, but I think Giuliani is going about this the wrong way, because he is immediately seeking as a remedy the tossing out of all these ballots immediately and appointing Trump electors. And I think that is jumping too far ahead, because while we have a lot of evidence, we can only go, well, this is what the data suggests. Well, the data, while it provides a lot of evidence of fraud, it doesn't tell us how widespread the fraud is and whether or not it was enough to overturn the election. For that, we need to get access to the evidence. So instead of just saying, hey, let's go ahead and toss all this out and, appoint Trump electors, maybe what they should be doing is saying, hey, here's the evidence that we got. It sure seems like a lot of fraud is going on, a lot of illegal activities. Now, yes, a lot of these ballots were, counted in violation of state laws, and they broke the laws, but, the judges are going to be very hesitant about tossing out votes because the election officials acted wrongly, disenfranchising voters, But instead of doing that, maybe what they should have been doing as far as a remedy is seeking for the judge to order a forensic audit of the election, for a forensic audit of the voting machines and a forensic audit of the mail-in ballots to, determine the legitimacy. How many of them are coming from dead voters? How many of them are coming from votes from out of state? And everyone wants to look at all of these individual, instances of election fraud in isolation. Okay, yes, if there was a 50,000, lead, right? 10,000 dead voters, not enough to overthrow the election, right? 40,000 or 41,000 people voting who live in a different state, well, that's not quite enough to overturn the election. Put them together, that's enough to overturn the results of the election. Right? If the lead was 50,000. Now, I'm just using that as an example here. And so we need to be thinking about, less about just trying to immediately overthrow everything and just try and focus on getting access to the evidence to force a forensic audit of the evidence. And therefore, once the forensic audit is done, we would be able to figure out for sure, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, whether or not there was enough fraud that took place to overturn the results of the election. That would be generally the better way to go about it. Now, how do you get a judge to actually give that to you, give you access to do that forensic audit or order that forensic audit? I don't know, because there's a lot of judges that are just blatantly corrupt. Some of them, take a look at this, see it's a nightmare, that there is no great solution. So they're willing to go ahead and say, well, the media has been calling it for Biden for so long. People are starting to believe it's Biden. We're just going to ignore all the evidence and let that go through, because finding out just how fraudulent the election is would go ahead and throw everything into chaos. But then there's also the corrupt judges. So we got the spineless judges, we got apathetic judges that really just don't care, and then we got corrupt judges, such as this judge, U.S. District Judge Nicholas Garofis. I don't know how to pronounce that name, but in any event, he ordered the Trump administration to start accepting new DACA applicants. Let me give you a translation on that. He is ordering the Trump administration to willfully violate U.S. immigration laws, to violate the laws passed by Congress, to violate his oath of office, and to violate the Constitution in order to basically give amnesty to illegal immigrants, even though Congress has provided no such amnesty. And it's also interesting how they've been trying to argue this, that, well, Obama was able to implement DACA through an executive order. An executive order he had no authority to do, violated the law, and violated the constitutional authority. I'm getting a little tongue-tied there, but the Constitution, and yes, I do have a bit of a tongue tie, and so sometimes it does trip me up. Maybe eventually I'll get surgery to fix that. But any event, Obama completely violated the law in order to enact this as an executive order, and then Trump comes through and goes, nope, I'm repealing that executive order because it's an illegal executive order, and these judges come up and they go, no, you don't have the authority. Well, Obama did this all by himself. If he has the authority to enact it, which he didn't, then I not only have the authority, I am legally obligated to repeal this. And they go, no, we don't think you went through the right process in order to repeal this. There is no process. The courts do not get to dictate what the process is for the enactment of an executive order. And so when we have a situation where judges are issuing rulings in direct violation of the law to say that someone must directly violate the law, is it any wonder that we're having such problems getting through to these judges about the evidence of election fraud in order to get access to a forensic audit, in order to be able to, start overturning the results of the election? Of course not. These judges don't care about the law. We have judges ordering people to violate the law. So it's no wonder we're having problems in the court. With that said, though, there is some good news. Oh, yes, there's some good news, and I'm sure the left is just freaking out and having a complete and total meltdown. So what is that good news? Here it is.
In a press release published on Friday, the Arizona State Legislature announced an independent audit of the Dominion software and equipment that was used by Maricopa County in this year's election. The audit was called by the current Senate President Karen Fann and Speaker of the House Rusty Bowers, both Republicans. The GOP controls both chambers of the Arizona legislature. Incoming Senate Government Chair Michelle Ugenti-Rita and House Majority Leader Warren Peterson, both of whom are Republicans, joined them. The Maricopa County Board of Supervisors agreed to the independent audit. In the statement, House Majority Leader Warren Peterson said that a significant number of voters believe that fraud occurred, and with the number of irregularities, it is easy to understand why. Especially concerning are the allegations made surrounding the vendor Dominion. It is imperative that the county immediately do a forensic audit on the Dominion software and equipment to make sure the results were accurate.
Yes! We're finally getting the forensic audit. At least I hope we're getting the forensic audit. I mean, there seems to be finally a good push by state legislatures to say, yes, we need a forensic audit because there is evidence of fraud that is going on and people have no trust in this election. And so we need to make sure that democracy is preserved, that the election results that are being reported are in fact the true and accurate election results. All right, and this is really what we've been pushing for, is to get a forensic audit. You know, this whole immediately just go off and toss out the election and have the state legislatures appoint whatever electors that they want. Well, yes, I would support that because, you know, the other option is Biden, which we really know is just Kamala Harris's administration. But in any event, the main thing that we needed was the audit, the forensic audit, because then we would be able to determine what the extent of the election fraud was. I mean, could you imagine what would happen after this forensic audit if it comes back and goes, holy crap, the Dominion voting machines were switching votes and the algorithm was designed to switch votes? Holy crap, there's records of these machines sending the results out, you know, to Germany and out of the country. You know, could you imagine if that were, you know, the case? And then to go through and do a complete audit of the mail-in ballots and trying to match the signatures, as well as actually making sure that the vote count was the vote count. You know, in Georgia, you know, we had Project Veritas inside the Georgia recount talking about how people had voted for Trump and they were in the recount calling it for Biden. Amazing. But, you know, so if we go through and we take a look at this, and this is what I've been trying to say, is that for the state legislatures, this should be a no-brainer for them. Because what's the loss here? People don't trust the election. They do a forensic audit. If the forensic audit comes back and goes, okay, yeah, there was a little bit of fraud, but it didn't overturn the results of the election, you know, and that Biden was the illegitimate winner. How does that play out in the media? Well, and the voters. Well, the voters said, you know, yes, we had serious concerns about this election. We saw all types of fraud. You listened to us. You actually did your job as representatives. You listened to us. You investigated the issue, and you ensured that democracy is still alive and well. You look good. You look good. You know, the worst thing that you can do is just say, nah, I don't care, is to be apathetic, ignore the concerns of the people that you are elected to represent. You know, that would be the bad thing. So doing the forensic audit, yes, you look good, you know, and let's say the forensic audit comes back as we expect it to come back, to show that there was massive fraud and that it was to such a degree that it more than overturned the results of the election. That the amount of fraud, you know, led to a Biden victory when really it was a Trump victory. And that the amount of fraud was massive, you know, on a massive scale, never before seen. Well, then you get to come back and say, hey, we listened to your concerns. We reviewed the evidence. We agreed with you. We investigated this. We found out that Donald Trump actually did win, you know, and now you're the protectors of democracy. You fulfilled your constitutional role in protecting democracy and the votes of the people, and you're ensuring that the actual winner of the election gets seated. Either way, it's a win-win for you. So why wouldn't you do the forensic audit? And that's what we've been trying to push for. Do the forensic audit. And I'm glad to see that they are finally starting to take some action and pushing for that. Seeing what the results of that forensic audit is. Because you understand here that how this forensic audit goes will determine what happens going forward in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Georgia, right? If the forensic audit down there in Arizona comes back and shows such massive blatant fraud and that the voting machines were in fact switching votes, well, then all of a sudden you're going to get forensic audits in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And with those states in mind, you can completely overturn the results of the election and we can end this nightmare of the media trying to pretend like Joe Biden is a legitimate president. Because at this particular point in time, there is no legitimacy to a president-elect Biden. There would be no legitimacy to a Biden administration because nobody has confidence in this election. No one believes the results. everyone's looking at the data and going, yeah, this was massive fraud. So this is what needs to be done. Now, of course, the media doesn't like that. Oh, no. The media, you must not question in any way, shape, or form the legitimacy of a Joe Biden administration. And so they're going to go through every conversation. They're going to be determined to call him president-elect, even though by all legal measures, Joe Biden is not yet the president-elect. We haven't determined who actually won the election yet. So the media, every time they say President-elect Joe Biden, at this point in time, they are lying. They are deceiving you. They are purposely promoting false information, misinformation. You know, that thing they keep trying to accuse us of? That thing that they say that Facebook needs to take more action against? And yet, at this particular point in time, they are actively promoting misinformation. And they're doing their usual thing of trying to ridicule, look down upon, and try and cast anybody who disagrees with them as insane conspiracy theorists, as people unable to accept reality. And yet these are the same group of people who have been proven to have pushed baseless conspiracy theories for the last 4 years. So here's CNN going through their BS.
A recent poll says that 3 out of 4 Trump voters falsely, erroneously, wrongly believe that Joe Biden only won the election because of voter fraud. Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, one of President Trump's most ardent supporters, he tweeted this morning, take a look, over 50 million Americans think this election was stolen. That's more than 1/3 of the electorate. For that reason alone, we owe it to the country to investigate election integrity, unquote. What's your message to Congressman Jordan?
I don't know what that means necessarily, to investigate election integrity, but I'll tell you this. Attorney General Barr issued a statement earlier this week that he wasn't aware of any fraud at a scale that could flip the outcome of this vote. Again, listen to the trusted sources. Listen to the election officials out there. They think it was a pretty clean election.
Now, there are so many things wrong with that particular clip. First off, Jake Tapper starts off by immediately declaring 3-4 times that anybody questioning the results of the election is wrong, false, basically trying to call him insane. I think somebody's protesting too much. Do you really have to go through that level? And then they bring on the worst possible witness or worst possible person to try and prop up as an authority on election security, because he's already shown that he is a corrupt bureaucrat. And let me explain this. Dominion, everybody knows the Dominion voting machines are what's being accused of helping to rig this election through vote switching in their machines. Dominion sits on the advisory board within this guy's office, right? And he allowed Dominion, rather than coming out and posting on their corporate website, yeah, we deny the accusations and we did nothing wrong. Instead of doing that and posting it on their company website, he allowed them to use their position within the Pentagon. I think so. The Pentagon. CISA or whatever. Anyways, he allows them to use their position sitting on the advisory board to type up a letter that then his government office releases. So basically, instead of posting it on their company website, he allows them to borrow the perceived credibility of the government agency designed to protect our elections. He allowed them to borrow their credibility to issue what is nothing more than a corporate denial of any wrongdoing that would happen in every single case. Anytime a company is accused of something, they issue a letter of denial. But rather than issuing that letter of denial and posting it on their corporate website and tweeting it out or posting it on Facebook, he allowed them to use the credibility of his government agency to try and claim, nope, nothing, there was nothing wrong here, nothing to see here. So that right there shows that he has, at the bare minimum, bad judgment and is not a person that should be on air talking about election security and how you shouldn't be questioning the legitimacy of the media's proclaimed outcome of the election. And then there's the final part, the whole go through and take a look at your trusted sources of information. Okay. My trusted sources of information are letting me know about all the fraud that took place. And this is another thing, this whole trusted sources of information. What, like CNN? CNN that has been caught lying to us for years. CNN, who has been caught numerous times by Project Veritas, openly bragging and admitting that they are pushing false information, that they are lying to us, that they are gaslighting us. CNN, this is the guy saying, trusted sources of information appearing on CNN that has ran 4 years straight of one baseless conspiracy theory after another that has been totally and completely debunked. So, that's just me scratching the surface of what is wrong with this particular video. This guy going on and trying to interview. Right? They're protesting too much. They're using someone who's already been shown, at the very least, bad judgment to allow his office to be abused to issue what is basically nothing more than a corporate denial of the charges. And then going on Conspiracy News Network and telling us to go to the trusted sources of information. Well, that really depends on who you consider a trusted source of information, isn't it? Okay, so CNN and the media are out there trying to declare any questioning of this election is erroneous and wrong and, full of nut jobs, and yet they won't even look at the evidence. Right? They've made up their minds. We already know that they are in the tank. But if that is not enough, they got another attack. Oh, yes. They got another attack. Someone that they think might have a little more credibility in order to attack President Trump.
Winning is so important, and he always deserves to win, that it's okay to lie, cheat, and steal. It's not the process, it's getting the win in your column, right? He's in a situation now where he cannot change the fact that he lost. He lost decisively. He performed very badly compared to other Republicans who actually beat expectations. So there's nobody to blame but himself. So he's spinning madly. He's desperate. And I said this before. If he thinks he's going down, he's going to take the rest of us down with him. I think his cruelty is a way to flex his power. Who's going to stop him? Nobody. And that's something we've seen in the last 4 years, which I personally did not anticipate, although I guess in retrospect I should have. It's not simply that Donald is horrible and incompetent and cruel. It's that he's been allowed to be. Every transgression that's gone on unpunished has been an opportunity for him to push the envelope even further. So, that's partially why we're going to see him smashing as much stuff on his way out the door as he can. I think it would be a tragedy if Donald and everybody who's enabled him and committed crimes with him is not held accountable.
Okay. So yes, they want to trot out Trump's estranged niece to go out and attack him. Now here's somebody that up until this year, nobody's heard of, right? As much as Trump has been in the public eye, the public figure, him having a brother and having nieces, I guess we just kind of assume that, yeah, maybe he has nieces and nephews, but it's never really been in the public eye. Everyone's always been talking about Donald Trump and his kids, nieces, siblings. No one's really paid much of attention to any of that. And so here is somebody who's not part of, or will not be part of, the inheritance of Donald Trump's estate and fortune and businesses when Donald Trump passes away of old age sometime in the next 15, 20 years. All right, here is somebody who has no public, perception, basically no more of a name than me or you or any other average person. Now, yeah, I'm sure she's not, dirt poor. I'm sure she's slightly above middle class, but I have an indication here that there are some sour grapes, that, there's some jealousy. She's not nearly as wealthy as her cousins. And so she's taking a look at everything that's going on, and she's going to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to get my 15 minutes of fame. They didn't invite me to the last holiday get together. They, didn't get me that gift, or, hey, I had this great business idea and they wouldn't even loan me the money. Well, guess what? Now I'm going to get back at them. The media hate Donald Trump. So I bet you if I go to the media as, presumably a close relative, although close is relative. I mean, relationally, I guess a niece is, close, but, it's not like she's really part of the family. The inner circle is invited to the holiday get-togethers. I mean, she's pretty much, the outcast of the Trump family. And so she's thinking, you know what? I'm going to get back at them. I'm going to go to the media, let them know, hey, I'm Trump's niece. If you pay me enough money, I'll go out there and I'll trash him. And being his niece, I can claim to have some intimate knowledge, that I have been in the inner circle. I know exactly what's going on, how the family thinks, and where all the skeletons are buried. Just bring me on, pay me this much of a fee, and I'll go around and trash Trump all you want. I mean, yes, it all seems like it's sour grapes. That's just my impression. So I don't really put any stock into anything that, Mary Trump says, because I understand she's just going out and trying to, get some, her 15 minutes of fame in and collect a paycheck while she's at it. And yet this is supposed to be effective for us. This is supposed to be very convincing. Okay. So, all of this is a good shot by the media. The media is working hard, but of course, when all else is failing, they can always go back to this year's greatest gift to the Democrats in order to try and get people to shut up, move along, and just do whatever the Democrats say.
Christmas is going to be a lot harder. And, I don't want to scare anybody here, but understand the facts. We're likely to lose another 250,000 people dead between now and January. You hear me? Because people aren't paying attention. People aren't paying attention.
Yes, COVID, and people are gonna die. People are gonna die if you don't just surrender the election to me. COVID, is going to kill everybody, and only I'm going to be able to save them. So you must surrender the election to me. Oh, we can't question the results of the election despite all of the evidence of fraud, because people are going to die because of COVID. The fear-mongering has always been their go-to. It's really all they've had this entire year is fear-mongering over COVID, and then running baseless conspiracy attacks on Trump, and then just calling Trump a whole bunch of names, trying to stir up anger. But really, it's been the fear-mongering over COVID, which has a 99% survival rate. We got multiple vaccines now, and, the science doesn't really back up what the Democrats keep claiming, which is why the Democrats have been playing politics with COVID the entire time, using it to pick the winners and losers in the economy. So yes, that is their go-to. You won't listen to us when we tell you to don't believe your lying eyes. Don't look at data. Don't look at science. Don't look at what actual, intelligence officials or former intelligence officials who did this kind of work, have to say. No. Believe the media without evidence. Believe the media that this was a legitimate election without evidence, despite the fact that the evidence that we do have shows the exact opposite. We even had video in Georgia showing the fraud taking place, where, people were, removed from the room, and then they get suitcases or official, I guess what they're trying to say, no, those are official ballot boxes, out from under a table that they wheeled in a table, it had a cloth over it. And then only after everybody leaves do they grab these, boxes full of ballots and start counting them in secret. And they weren't anywhere with any of the other ballots prior to having everybody removed. So nobody could actually see them count. And they tell you, no. Don't believe your lying eyes. Oh, video schmidio, video lies, don't you know? Surveillance video, that lies. The media, they're the ones telling you the truth, even though they're not providing any evidence. And of course, you have the Facebook fact checkers, right? And the Twitter fact checkers, who aren't actually checking any facts. We know the con game of the fact checkers. These are left-wing opinion writers who think their opinions are facts. Now, they routinely get things wrong. They're routinely debunked by the actual evidence. But, the left doesn't care about evidence. They don't care about facts. They don't even care about science. They just think that if they have an opinion, that's a fact. If they just shout science, then it must be science and unquestionable. And of course, if Biden gets into office, things are only going to continue to get worse because they're going to push for more censorship, and they're going to keep pushing for the use of fact checkers to go after what they consider misinformation. Now, what they consider misinformation isn't, things that are actually false. It's just things that they just don't like because it ruins their narrative. And so now they're going to push and try to apply more pressure, more censorship.
Even as Facebook comes under fire for its part in the spread of misinformation, the company says the news ecosystem quality changes were not meant to be permanent. What does it mean by that, and what kind of moral, and backlash is that creating within the company? Why aren't these changes meant to be permanent?
That's a great question, and I think one that Facebook employees were asking themselves. The news ecosystem quality is a metric that Facebook has been using internally for a long time to give a sort of ranking to news organizations. So imagine a scale of 1 to 10, and you would have news organizations that they believed had more sort of factual news on one end, and news organizations that perhaps carried more misinformation or just had in times violated sort of Facebook standards on what factual news would be. And so ahead of the elections, they decide that they're going to experiment with this, and they're going to try up-ranking the news organizations that consistently gave factual information. And they found that people's news feeds were quote unquote nicer. They were seeing more factual information, more accurate information at the top of their news feeds. However, Facebook's executives then told their employees the change was temporary and never meant to be permanent. And that's led to sort of internal reckoning among employees, asking themselves, well, if we can do this, if we can sort of change up our own rankings, why aren't we regularly making the decision to show people factual news?
Okay, so first off, that is them actually providing evidence that Facebook is not a platform, but rather a publisher, in complete violation of Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act. But okay, let's just ignore that for a moment. So this is them trying to say, well, we determine what's a credible source. So, okay, so do you uprank CNN? Well, CNN routinely gets caught pushing misinformation, false information, and baseless conspiracy theories, and yet you push them up there. But see, the main point here is that they saw the results, that those who control the information that you can and can't see can control basically how you're going to vote and what you will and will not support, because information is power, and Facebook has lots of power based off of their ability to censor information and be able to change user behavior. This isn't the first time they've done an experiment whereby what they decide to show you and not show you in your newsfeed does determine or change the results of your behavior. So we got what's going on here. First, they want to legalize weed, because, they need you not in your right mind. They want to go off and, just deny all the evidence, call everyone crazy if they're evidence. And push, this whole least trusted sources of information, and yet try and convince you that they are actually trusted sources of information. The echo chamber, this is them gaslighting. And then they want to engage in more censorship in order to keep you in that echo chamber. And the, only information you get is gaslit information, false information that they're going to then try and convince you is true. They're going to try and use people to, looking for a payday to claim that they are, intimately involved, or they know, the inner workings of anybody they disagree with and how they are horrible, evil people, and then fearmonger based off of death. I mean, they're going through the same playbook that they go through every time they get caught in a scandal. And as we get closer and closer to the evidence, them yelling and screaming, "Stop looking at the evidence, pay attention to us, just trust what we say. Ignore the evidence, just trust what we say without evidence." The more they do that, the more we know that we are right above the target and the dam's about to break. It happens every time. And the fact that they are now engaged in this, the gaslighting, the personal attacks, the fear mongering, and the more consistent and growing calls for greater online censorship to control all the information that you are and are not allowed to see. That gives me great hope that the forensic audit in Arizona, as long as it's actually conducted, is going to blow the dam wide open, and we'll get 4 more years of Trump. At least that's what my hope is. Whether or not there's enough politicians with the backbones to actually do that, now this is the state legislature calling for a forensic audit. I don't know if they have the authority to actually force the governor to actually engage in a forensic audit. I don't know what, the authority is of the legislature, other than to, threaten to use their constitutional authority to just appoint Trump electors if they refuse to engage in a forensic audit. Because the forensic audit, unfortunately, and this is what's really sad, unfortunately would mostly be supervised and conducted by the very people that allowed election fraud to take place to begin with, who are more concerned about saving their own butts than getting to what the true results of the election is. So anyways, we know we're getting close. We know, the left is freaking out. We can tell by it. We know that if Biden does successfully, steal this election through outright fraud, that it's going to be the end to the freedom of information. It's going to be an end to the First Amendment, the Second Amendment. We know that, you're basically going to see a great purge, the electronic and internet version of book burning. We know all of this. This is why it's so important that we stop the steal here, that we try and go through and get to the bottom of what the true results of the election was and how the left engaged in election fraud, all the different ways they engaged in election fraud. Now, of course, the media is out there trying to act so confidently that they gotten away with stealing this election. They have the audacity to ask Biden this question.
Going to attend your inauguration yet. Do you think it's important that he's there? You're laughing.
I think it would important only in one sense, not in a personal sense, important in the sense that we are able to demonstrate at the end of this chaos that he's created that there is peaceful transfer of power with the competing parties standing there, shaking hands and moving on. I think that's an important, what I worry about, Jake, more than the impact on the domestic politics, I really worry about the image we're presenting to the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. The rest of the world's looked at us, and you've heard me say this a number of times, I apologize for repeating it. They followed us not just because the power, or the example of our power, but the power of our example. And look where we are now in the world. Look how we're viewed. they're wondering, my Lord, these things happen in tin horn dictatorships. This is not the United States.
You're right. Election fraud does happen in third world dictatorships, which is why, we are fighting so hard to keep American democracy from your fraudulent election. Right? You're acting like the previous leaders of Venezuela and the current leader of Venezuela. But CNN is going out there with this foregone conclusion that no matter what happens, even if we did find the smoking gun, if we were allowed access to the evidence, we found the smoking gun of election fraud, that it wouldn't make a difference. Biden is going to be seated no matter what. So the questions are always, based off of that conclusion. And so they're going, well, isn't it important that, not only Trump concedes, but, he shows up for your inauguration, for that peaceful transfer of power. Well, it's not really a peaceful transfer of power if you outright stole the election through fraud and overthrew democracy. You stole power. It wasn't a peaceful transfer. And by the way, Trump never got a peaceful transfer of power. No, let's face it. Obama, Biden made sure that there was no peaceful transfer of power to the Trump administration. They, set up a phony investigation. They had him under constant attack and assault, and they made sure that the deep state that they had so thoroughly entrenched in the government would make it as impossible as possible. Yeah, try and say that a couple of times, but try to make it as impossible as could be for Trump to go off and implement his agenda. Now, luckily, Trump was still able to succeed and still had quite a successful administration. All right, but this whole peaceful transfer of power, you didn't give Trump that, and this whole foregone conclusion. Well, you know what? We're going to see what the results are going to be if we do get that forensic audit in Arizona that the state legislature is calling for. Then we'll see about whether or not there's any transfer of power. All right, because once that domino falls, the dominoes in all the other states are going to fall as well. All right, so, Biden, you're a garbage person. You're a horrible piece of crap. You're never going to be referred by me as president. Nothing that you do will ever be considered legitimate. And, Trump supporters are going to hold the Republicans' feet to the fire to be able to obstruct, stall, and prevent you from being able to do anything. All right, you are pushing this country towards civil war with your flat-out assault on democracy. And your fraudulent election and your refusal to actually allow an investigation, or the Democrats' refusal for an investigation. You're not even fit to kiss my ass. Now, we can go on and talk about Biden all we want, but we realize he's not the one running the show. It's Kamala Harris. And I understand why Biden thinks he won legitimately, because no one would have included him in the plans. No one would have given him any details because they know he, wouldn't be able to keep it a secret. In fact, he probably overheard what they were doing, which is why he came out and said that we had put together the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud organization in the history of politics. Probably because of what he had overheard. But no one, believes that Joe Biden, had any mental capacity, awareness, or wherewithal to be able to pull off or be a part of this election fraud. We know it was more Kamala Harris involved in there. She is a horrible, garbage, disgusting, ugly human being. She is one of the worst of the worst. And so what we are seeing is the swamp, swamp rats, the swamp things, trying to come back out with a vengeance to undo a government that was set up for the people by President Trump. We see them trying to undo the prosperity that under Trump, the global peace. They are back here saying, how dare you think that you in the middle class and you at the lower class should have any say in government? How dare you think that you had a voice? How dare you think that you should be allowed to rise up? Don't you know we've been rigging the system to keep you down? Don't you know we've been not allowing capitalism for a long time? We've been doing crony capitalism, picking the winners and losers. And only those people that suck up to us and will donate lots of money to us, only those people will we consider having the ability to move from rags to riches. But most of you people, we need you just to stay down at the bottom because we need people to worship us, people to rule over. If everyone was able to have equality, well then, who would we look down upon? So we see the swamp trying to come back with a huge vengeance. Okay. All right, so that's it for this episode. Hey, don't forget to subscribe to the audio version of the podcast because I do audio a lot more than I do video because video episodes, especially of this length, takes a lot of time and, to set up, getting the clips and putting everything together, doing the editing, and then putting it into the final product. So that takes quite a bit of time. So I do a lot more audio than I do video, but I do like to get out the video because otherwise you may not know about the audio because there still isn't any natural discovery or real way to market a podcast. It's just, tweet it out, put it out there on Facebook and hope you're using the right hashtags to get enough people to view it. Okay. So thank you so much for listening. Hey, don't forget to hit subscribe, whether you're watching this on video or listening to it on the audio version. Don't forget to hit subscribe. Leave me ratings, reviews, likes, comments. You know the drill. Share it around. All right. Don't miss another episode. Thank you so much. And I will be back again soon.